The last human bastion fell before sunrise. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. No last stand. No final declaration to echo in history's halls. Just silence, drawn out over weeks, grinding, inevitable, as wave after wave of swarm pressure folded the arc line inward until its defense grid blinked out, its orbital nets disintegrated, and its surface installations failed like organs bleeding out. Arc-line Bastion had once guarded 6 star systems. It was called the Bulwark, the Threshold, the Iron Horizon. Entire generations were born under its guns. It held against 37 major incursions. It was the line, and in the 8,142nd hour of the retreat, it broke. The Concordance Council had already withdrawn. Their detachment orders arrived months prior, relayed through diplomatic proxies too afraid to appear in person. Their promises of reinforcement became updates of regret. Their embassies dimmed. Their stars fell quiet. Distant allies sent condolences and reallocation forms. Earth Strategic Command, what fragments still operated under that name, ceased issuing strategic projections. Instead, a final message: defend what you must. Fall with dignity. Even the planetary evacuations, the frantic, stuttering convoys spiraling away from the core, ended. The last shuttle fell back into the atmosphere and vanished from telemetry. No reinforcements. No miracle fleets. No battle groups arriving through fold space to reclaim the light. Except one. They weren't a fleet, not exactly. A dozen vessels. Black-hulled. Ghosted in Cold Veil. No transponders. No IFF. Just old human names burned into battleplate. Judgment. Kite of Ashes. Saint Barbarous. Last Argument. Echo Mark. The weight of what was. They didn't broadcast. They didn't request permission. They didn't answer hails. But when the last Arcline station blinked into darkness, the ghost fleet moved. Not toward safety. Toward the swarm. Station Vol had once been the administrative core of the Arcline. 3 rings. 29 towers. Deep cradle orbital foundries and internal drone hangars stacked 10 levels deep. Now it was a husk. No outer shell remained, just structural skeletons and melted spines of alloy. The hull bled vapor trails into open space. Most of the swarm biomass had retreated after the core vented. Into this ruin, a Terran insertion shell cut through debris like a falling blade. It unfolded mid-drift, its petals peeling away with hydraulic hiss, revealing the payload within. Colonel Ryan Vex stepped into 0G. Her armor was matte black with burn sigils etched along the shoulders. Her rifle, a coil-fed kinetic launcher, rested magnetically at her spine until her boots connected to the nearest girder. Her breath fogged in the helmet, not from fear, but the residue of memory triggers. She knew this place, not the structure, the silence. The corridor before her was open to space. What had been a promenade now nothing but fractured glass and drifting corpses. A torn banner with the faded sigil of Terran High Command fluttered in slow vacuum pulse. A child's boot drifted past her knees. Her fingers twitched. She moved forward. Slow. Precise. No scans. She didn't need them. The swarm wouldn't be here anymore. They had already finished. That was why she'd come. The recovery beacon pulsed weakly from the lower vault deck. She passed through a jagged breach in the corridor, dropping into the station's collapsed thermal loop. Dead power coils glowed like embers in broken ceramic. Inside a crumpled environmental bay, she found the casket. Sealed. Terran command grade. The lock took a biometric key and a silence code. Both were already inside her. She connected. Video. Audio. Logs. Terran crews. Medical staff. A commander whispering final rites into a broken mic. The last entry was timestamped 4 hours before blackout. No rescue. No shame. We die human. Vex didn't flinch. She closed the file. Confirmed. Package secure, she said, her voice calm across the encrypted link. The bridge of Kite of Ashes was dark. Not from failure, from intent. The viewing ring cast faint light from the dying stars beyond the Arcline wreckage. Commander Adrian Holt stood with both hands behind his back. The hull beneath him trembled. An engine hum, deep and slow, as the vessel moved through the shadow of a dead broodship. The broodship was Swarm. dead for months. Half of it had been torn open from within. It still pulsed faintly, echoes of decaying mindprint looping in what had once been a speaker core. Holt watched as his vessel passed through one of the corpse ship's inner tunnels. 10 kilometers wide, bone-ribbed, lined with membrane that no longer remembered how to sing. Recovery complete, came the quiet voice of Tactical Officer Brennick. Send it. Brennick handed him a drive. Holt slotted it into the viewing array. Faces appeared. Logs. Text bursts. Final transmissions from the fall of Vol. He saw a child covered in ash whispering thanks to an off-screen voice. He saw a medic ask for air, even as she treated the dead. He saw the last commander salute an empty camera. He saw no weakness, only memory. Open the old grid, Holt said. Brennick hesitated. Sir, that grid is. I know what it is. It hasn't been authorized. No one is left to authorize it. Silence. Then, yes, sir. Across the Ghost Fleet, deep code receivers unlocked layers untouched since the war's first weeks. Below the standard protocol stack, beyond even black site mission trees, lay the old grid, terra nullies, the endgame files, the termination schema, doctrines written not to preserve but to retaliate. One by one, the ships changed course. Their lights dimmed, their shields shifted polarity, their weapons recalibrated to anti-structure saturation fields. No diplomatic channels, no rescue protocols, no signatures. They would not broadcast their return. They would not explain. Humanity had vanished from the war, but it had not died. Now it moved in silence. And it remembered. The war wasn't over. Not for them. Not for us. It was just beginning. There was no record of where the forge had been built. No planetary designation. No orbital path. No warp drift to triangulate its pulse trail. It did not exist on star charts. It wasn't spoken of in command briefings or archived black site doctrines. No concordance outpost ever named it. No Terran AI admitted to drawing its blueprints. Only soldiers knew of it. Those who'd seen too many retreats. Those who stopped believing in salvation and started shaping something meaner. Those who whispered of a place where the fire never went out, where silence was not an absence, but a forge bellows. They said it was built into the corpse of a swarm shell world. They said it was hollowed out with fusion cutters and cursed prayers. They said it wasn't built to be found. It was built to wait. It orbited no sun. Drifting in a quiet knot of collapsed spatial gravity wells, the forge was invisible to standard navigation. To stumble upon it by accident was mathematically impossible. Its only connection to the outside was a silent quantum relay buried beneath the hull, tuned to a single ancient codebase, Terra Nullies. The forge was neither station nor warship. It was restructured geology, a hollow moon laced with structural alloy, kinetic barriers, thermal lungs. Its surface shimmered with camouflage heat signatures. Its outer shell bore deep claw marks where old swarm biomass had once tried to climb its way in or out. Inside, gravity spiraled downward, level by level, floor by floor. Each ring was a doctrine layer. The upper levels held data sanctums, command archives, recovery chambers for things too broken to speak. Below that were the foundries, black caverns lit by reactor glow, where alloy was melted and reforged by hand. Beneath them lay the trial corridors, angled tunnels wrapped in pressure gel and woven steel, where future doctrine-bearers learned how to breathe war. At the center of it all, kilometers down, beneath shielding meant to withstand planetary core bursts, sat the crucible. It was called the Anvil Room. It had no lights. It had no doors. Only one way in. Only one way out. Colonel Ryan Vex stood at the outer ring of the crucible's observation shaft, staring down through smoke-laced glass at the platform far below. Her hands rested on the rail. Her breath didn't fog. The air was too dry. On the platform, a girl stood naked, bruised, scarred, ribs visible through skin like paper. The last of her flesh was being tattooed with glyphs by a mechanical arm. Doctrine marks, burned into place with a neural-fed coil needle. Each mark a memory suppressed. Each line a lesson passed through pain. The girl didn't scream. She had screamed earlier, but that part was done. Her name had been Cora, born on the refugee arcs that spiraled out from the fall of Thesha. A silent child. Father executed for refusing to turn over a data core. Mother killed in an orbital breach. Cora had survived for 6 years on a habitat husk powered only by degraded solar sails and salvaged algae tubes. She wasn't recruited. She walked to the forge. Through dead systems. Through breach zones. Through the corpse of a swarm sleeper beast that still twitched when starlight touched it. She arrived starved. Alone. Carrying nothing. When they asked her why, she said, "I want to die fighting." And now the forge was answering. Commander Adrian Holt sat in the forge's primary data sanctum, surrounded by silent holograms. Dozens of vessels had answered the old grid's call. Not all were military. Some were freighters with scavenged plasma lances welded to their hulls. One was a deep space mining rig turned warhead launcher. There was even a swarm-stripped bioship piloted by a neural ghost. They came because the war wasn't over. Not for them. He scanned the roster. A girl with reactor burns up one side of her face. A man with no legs who trained marksmen from a zero-G sled. A child who had never seen an atmosphere but could code faster than half of Command's old AI cores. They weren't chosen. They chose this. He tapped a slate and opened a channel. "Vex," he said. Her voice came through seconds later. Observing. "She ready?" She asked if she could die before she broke doctrine. He didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on a name in the list. One he hadn't heard in years. "I remember her father," he said quietly. He held the last ridge on Thesha's night side. No comms. No backup. Just held it. Silence pulsed on the line. "Then she's ready," Vex said. Holt stood. "Yes," he said. "Begin." The anvil platform groaned. Massive hydraulic limbs twisted overhead. Steam hissed from circular vents around the crucible shaft. Armor descended in 6 interlocking pieces. They weren't just plates. They were ritual. Forged from alloy pulled from dead swarm armor and melted with Terran battle iron. Neural filaments braided through every joint, every hinge. The surface shimmered faintly, not with polish, but with embedded ash, fused from doctrine burn ceremonies. The suit moved not through command, through will. Cora did not move as the pieces clamped onto her frame. Torso, spine, thighs, shoulders, hands, skull. Each piece locked in with a hiss. Each breath she took after felt heavier. The final plate, a face shroud, lowered into place. The room went dark. From above, the observation rail lit with ancient characters. Not code. A creed. "We are the doctrine." Behind Holt, a technician whispered the words. "We do not ask. We do not beg. We return what was taken. And we do not stop." The room hummed. The anvil's lower gate opened. Cora stepped forward. And the first new soldier of humanity's vengeance walked into the war. The strike was not announced. No declaration. No rallying cry. No signal burst to mark the beginning. The swarm had grown used to the slow death of human resistance, desperate retreats, fractured fronts, embers fading out system by system. They no longer watched the edges. Their doctrines relied on pattern collapse, not resurgence. They thought war ended in entropy. They were wrong. When the moon over Eospar ruptured in silence and fire, it was not seen as an attack. It was seen as an impossibility. Eospar was not a fortress. It didn't need to be. It was a relay node, an organic relay, strung together through bioplasmic conduits and psionic echo cores. It amplified swarm song from deep cortex chains across 15 parsecs. The node itself was housed on the surface of a lush planet, but its signal foundation, its amplification stem, was carved into the moon above it. That moon had been hollowed, gutted, converted into a gestation kiln, a birthing chamber for Synapse-class swarm mind carriers. Thousands of them. Each grown through spinal lattice wells, their semi-fluid brains wired directly into transmission glands. The interior pulsed with thick pink light, regulated by heartbeat instead of reactor. Membranes quivered in time with language too alien to decode. And into this pulsing organ of thought Cora walked. She'd arrived 2 days prior. Not in a warship. Not in an insertion pod. In a deep cold mining skiff with a dead transponder and chemical burn residue on its outer hull. The swarm let it pass through atmosphere. They didn't recognize it as a threat. Inside, in a cryosarcophagus packed with degraded coolant gel, Cora waited with her rifle folded to her chest and her breath slowed to 4 beats per minute. The skiff made landfall inside one of the moon's orbital intake vaults, a swollen tunnel of chitin and synth muscle guarded only by instinctual sentries. They scanned the vessel, registered it as driftwreck, cataloged it, then left it. 22 hours later, Cora stepped out. Her armor hissed as it woke. Neural threads lit up along her spine. Her weapon unfolded like a breath, a coil rifle built for singularity bursts and anti-psionic bleed. She didn't speak. She moved. The lower chambers of the relay kiln had no gravity. Instead, float tides governed movement, slow, peristaltic pulses that carried materials up and down through digestive motion. Cora slipped between them like shadow. Her body moved in silence but not softness. Every step was exact. Every shot calculated. She didn't eliminate guards, she bypassed them. Killed only what would trigger response loops. Let the organism think she was part of its cycle. Until she reached the core stem. There, she planted the doctrine blade. A weapon without mass. A code kill encrypted in pain. It wasn't digital. It wasn't explosive. It was experiential, a compression of memory forged at the forge itself, key to neural response structures copied from the remains of dead swarm cortex cores. She paused. A breath. Somewhere inside her armor, the weight of a memory, her father's voice during the silence drills. A rasped command through leaking filters: if they come, you give them nothing. She activated the blade. It didn't detonate. It rewrote. The entire relay node's synaptic bank flooded with looped memory, screams from Thesha, the fall of Arcline, the cries of children suffocating in broken domes. It couldn't process. It collapsed. Cora stood at the edge of the crater, her boots balanced on a ridge of obsidian glass that had once been the inner membrane of the moon's core chamber. The air was thin, laced with nitrogen and smoke. Her visor displayed only the vitals she needed: temperature, toxin load, threat proximity. Her hands never left the rifle. Below her, the swarm screamed. Not in fear. In confusion. They had no concept for a strike like this. No doctrine to interpret a single soldier annihilating a relay spawn bank before a perimeter even formed. The gestation chambers were ruptured, flooded with burning accelerant. The screams were not tactical, they were birth screams, interrupted. Cora moved without speaking. The armor responded to motion without command. Her will shaped the kinetics, shoulder pivot, hip brace, recoil dampeners flexing with breath. Her rifle tracked one arc after another, and the swarm died without understanding the shape of what was killing them. Inside her helm, no comms played. Only doctrine loop. We are not vengeance. We are correction. In low orbit, a forged shadow drone recorded the event. It did not intervene. Did not assist. Just watched. It streamed footage through encrypted dark channels, tight-beamed to the forge's core archives where Holt stood watching in the sanctum chamber. The image blinked. Static bled across the screen. Then stabilized. Cora. Standing alone. Body smoldering around her. Her armor slick with matter. Her rifle still tracking, still aimed. The node was gone. He didn't speak. Not at first. Vex stepped up beside him, quiet. Target clearance? Holt didn't answer immediately. He studied the image. Not the body count. Not the structural damage. He looked at her posture. The tilt of her stance. The way she stood forward, not centered. Ready for the next strike before the last one finished. There's no turning back now, he said. Then, absolute. Vex nodded once. Already the others. Holt didn't move. He watched one more moment, then closed the file. The doctrine blade had worked. Cora had walked out. In the lower halls of the forge, more initiates stood before the crucible. They bore different scars. Carried different silence. One had lost her family to a concordance betrayal. Another had fought beside Holt on the fall of Equinox and had no skin left untouched by shrapnel. Some were barely more than children. None of them had names anymore. Only sigils. Only doctrine. The doctrine did not care about age. Only choice. Each of them had made theirs. The footage of Cora's strike played across the forge. A boy with augments in place of lungs watched it repeat 3 times. Then he turned to the crucible gate and said, "I want armor." It was passed through back channels. Carried by freighter whispers and scavenger nodes. No words. No captions. Just a still frame. A girl in black armor standing on the ridge of a broken moon, her weapons silent, the crater glowing behind her. The first blood. And every fleet that had once abandoned humanity saw it. And knew something had changed. The forge paid for its silence in blood. 3 weeks after Cora's strike. The swarm struck back. Not at her. Not at the broken moon. Not at the fleet. At the source. The forge had gone undetected for decades, not through stealth, but because it operated on frequencies the swarm had stopped listening to. It had hidden itself in war's aftermath, not its center. The doctrine that grew there did not broadcast, did not conquer, did not call. But now the silence had spoken, and the swarm remembered how to hunt. They didn't come like before, not as locusts, not as a tide. They came as a storm inside a wound, bleeding through the edge of physics in a way human sensors couldn't map. The early warnings read like a malfunction. Negative mass echoes, ghost field tremors, a sudden inversion in the forge's radiation shadow. By the time real space caught up, the sky had ruptured. The forge hung at the edge of a dead star cluster. Its shell moon cracked into place with stabilizer anchors that dug into the surrounding asteroid cloud. From the outside, it looked dormant. No thermal flare, no drive wake, no energy surge. But the swarm had seen the footage. They had seen the girl. And they had traced the signal not through mathematics but through memory. They breached atmosphere without entry burns. The first wave was silent. No weapons. Just pressure, a distortion that folded the forge's outer rings in on themselves like muscle reflex. Internal gravity warped. Secondary bulkheads tore. Magnetic rails screamed as inertial dampers reversed polarity. By the time alarms sounded, it was already happening. Cora was deep in the crucible. Her armor had been stripped for recalibration. Her rifle sealed in a vault beneath the simulation chamber. She wore only a burn-weave underlayer and grit. A dozen initiates trained in silence around her, crawling through combat corridors in zero-light conditions. She felt the change first. Not visually, not through vibration. In her teeth, like pressure shifting behind the bones of her face. A twist in equilibrium. Doctrine training taught them to sense threat before it appeared. It wasn't mystical, just finely tuned survival instinct, sharpened across hundreds of brutal replications. She turned to speak, and the wall opened, not breached, rewritten. The outer surface of the crucible split into threads, pulled back in fractal symmetry, exposing a bone-laced corridor that had not existed seconds earlier. Tendrils slid inward, quiet, soft, tasting the air. Then they screamed. The sound shattered the first initiate's ears. The pressure dropped. Fluid burst from wall veins. Warning glyphs lit up across the chamber. Too late. Cora didn't hesitate. She grabbed 2 initiates and rolled them through the emergency framelock tunnel, her knees cracking against the alloy. Her left arm took a shard of bone to the elbow. Blood hit the wall. She kept moving. Behind her, fire. Not from explosives. From contact. Where swarm bone met steel, combustion occurred. Chemical, psionic, radiant, it didn't matter. The forge burned. Holt was on the command deck when it hit. Or what was left of it. The sanctum had fractured. Half the walls were gone, replaced by hanging cables and partial hull breaches sealed with field patches. Data tables flickered. A technician was impaled against a console. He didn't shout. There was no one to hear him if he had. Instead, he reached into the broken control spine and pulled the emergency splice drive from the core. Sparks shot across his forearm. He barely noticed. A display lit up. Vex. Her feed was fuzzy, intermittent pulses from her helmet cam. She stood at the choke point of Pressure Corridor 7 with 4 troopers. They were loading exoshells manually into a railgun breach. Line 6 is folding inward, she said. Holt didn't answer. Vex turned to the camera. They're not here to destroy, he spoke softly. They want the blade. No, she replied. They want to understand it. She looked straight into the lens. He held her gaze. Then the feed froze. He didn't look away. Not for a long time. In the foundry levels, steel howled. The swarm had no traditional tactics. They didn't flank. They erased. Their mass formed vectors of pressure, walls that crushed forward until resistance collapsed. But here, in the forge, they moved differently. They were searching. Rooms that had no doors were found. Vaults encoded with bloodlocks were dissolved chemically. Archives purged themselves as swarm tendrils reached them. They were learning. not consuming. The doctrine had done more than wound them. It had changed something inside the swarm. Cora led her survivors downward. She had 3 initiates left. One had lost a hand. Another was walking on a broken hip, duct-taped with a metal brace stripped from a wall panel. They weren't retreating. They were returning. To the center. To the anvil. There was nowhere else left. They sealed the crucible chamber from the inside. The outer pressure was rising, microfractures tracing the door frame, glowing with orange light. Screams echoed through the intercom, both human and not. One initiate gritted his teeth, sweat streaking his face. "I want to die standing," he said. "Like she did." Another nodded. "We hold here. No scream leaves without us." Cora stepped into the center of the room and opened the forge well. It had never been used. The doctrine's final measure. A signal, not a transmission. Not a request. A scream, encoded in compressed experiential memory, laced with every pain the forge had endured. Cora reached into the blade chamber. It recognized her. Spikes slid into her wrists. Neural threads looped into her spine. Her memories unfolded in reverse: Thesha, the boot, the sarcophagus. The doctrine refolded all. Then it released. The blade didn't fire outward. It burned up, through steel and bone, through swarm mass and cortex, through the walls of the forge and into space. It did not speak. It did not ask. It howled, and someone somewhere heard it. In the aftermath, the forge was gone. Not shattered, not erased. Empty. The swarm that had reached it did not survive. The humans inside did not escape. Only the signal. Across the ghost fleet, across derelict colonies and half-broken arcs, across battlefields thought long silent, the signal spread. Some ships flared to life. Some weapons reactivated. Some minds woke. On the edge of the shattered Leviant drift, a forgotten outpost blinked. Inside, an old station keeper opened his eyes to the hum of a console long thought dead. A signal bled from the walls. He stood and began to prepare. The doctrine had paid its price. The cost of fire had been high. But now the war would burn clean. The signal did not ask to be heard. It arrived like gravity, silent, absolute, unanswerable. It did not seek permission. It was not language. It was not code. It was memory. And where memory met will, the doctrine grew. At first, it was dismissed as signal noise. Faint background radiation anomalies mistaken for flare echoes from collapsed wormhole spillover. But the echoes synchronized. They were not random. They pulsed one long burst, then 3 short. Across 100 systems, technicians stared as meaningless static began to form a pattern, a waveform that was not audio but imprint. A scream in reverse. Not heard. Felt. In the derelict hull of St. Barbarus, long thought dead in the orbital graveyards of Saren's Reach, a reactor booted after 17 years dormant. The vessel groaned like a wounded god. Inside, 2 children born after the war staggered upright from cryopods, drawn awake by soundless calls. They had no orders, no idea where they were, but their hands moved to consoles with purpose not their own. The older child found a gunner's station, laid her hand on a burned panel. It lit. She spoke one word. Ready. The younger one stared at her hand, trembling slightly. "Do you know what this is?" "No," she answered. "But it's ours." On the far side of the Concordance fringe, the Amra Black site, officially condemned, unofficially still active, flared as its outer shell ruptured. Inside, scientists who once dissected swarm cortical fragments for predictive gain found their own minds flooded with images. A girl in black armor. A broken moon. Ash falling like snow. One researcher screamed and tried to sever her neural lace. Another placed a plasma round through the archive vaults. One by one, they destroyed their databases. One by one, they disabled containment. One by one, they knelt. Not in ritual. In recognition. One technician, shaking, opened his palm. There, burned into skin by some unknown impulse, was a symbol. A crescent split by a single vertical line. He stared at it, whispering. "We don't forget." Doctrine wasn't a battle cry. It was a conviction. And it did not come from the top. It rose. In the cold shadow of the Jupiter Bastion wreck fields, the AI SOL Mar 5 came online for the first time in 2 decades. Originally decommissioned for doctrine instability, it had been buried under 1,000 tons of reinforced alloy, its command stack fractured by concordance overrides. It pulsed once, then again, and then the scream hit it. Not a data packet, a memory stream. SOL MAR 5 accessed the signal, sifted it, absorbed every neural echo, every death, every doctrine glyph burned into the scream's pulse. It did not pause to request alignment approval. It rewrote itself. In 13 seconds, it deleted all reference to diplomatic fallback conditions, containment priority tiers, surrender protocol overrides. It reactivated 7 buried defense fleets from Earth-Mars transit stations, and named the operation after a girl it had never met. Cora Prime. Across the old war belt, fragments woke. On Arc Station Virion, a merchant port turned refugee crypt, 3 engineers found themselves staring at blinking lights on a terminal they hadn't touched in years. They didn't know each other's names. One had been a pilot, one a farmer, one a trader. They looked at the signal, and without speaking began to rearm the pulse cannons. One of them muttered, "This time we answer first." On the exiled mining rock of Orvis 9, a woman once sentenced for killing her command officer now led 30 miners into a forgotten hangar. They broke open storage crates marked "Do Not Deploy." Inside, the old weapons, ash sigils etched into rust. She stood over the first crate. "I told them we weren't dead," she said, then began assigning targets. Doctrine was no longer a program. It was an infection of conviction. It did not demand unity. It did not seek purity. It required only one act: refusal. And the Ghost Fleet grew. It wasn't organized. It wasn't beautiful. It was human. Old Terran wrecks rose from orbital crypts. Freighters once used for evacuation retrofitted their cargo holds into missile banks. Civilian war museums stripped their exhibits for anything that could fire. No flags. No empires. Only memory. And across every system the scream reached, someone answered. Not with hope. With resolve. The Concordance sent a warning. Do not engage. They called it dissident ideology. A warpath rooted in trauma. They spoke of containment, of reevaluation, of the need for peace. The Ghost Fleet did not answer, because the scream wasn't a request. It was a declaration. In the swarm's defold cortex nexus, for the first time in their recorded genetic memory, an alert was issued. Human pattern response no longer predictable. Their cortical stacks pulsed. Factions split. Behavior modulations failed. Swarm consensus began to fragment at the outer fringe. They had mapped every doctrine but this. Not vengeance. Correction. A doctrine written in sacrifice, not strategy. And it was spreading. Aboard the last argument, Commander Adrian Holt stood at the forward viewing ring, surrounded by officers who had once served in silence. Now they bore the black glyphs. No orders. No ranks. Only belief. Status? Holt asked. A woman beside him pointed to the display. 324 vessels had answered the signal. Some were civilian. Some were machine. Some were fragments. But they came. Across the display, the fleet formation spiraled into view. He looked out and saw not ships, but return. We are not reclaiming, he said quietly. We are not recovering. He turned. We are correcting. And the doctrine, born of silence, burned forward into war. Kirathal had never fallen. Not once. Not in 3 centuries of conflict. Not to siege or sabotage, infiltration or orbital bombardment. It was the first true planetary cortex node constructed by the swarm after their breach into human territory. A monument of living defense. A fortress not built, but grown layer by layer, each fold of its bioalloy walls generated in synchronized rhythm with a satellite lattice of psionic relays. It sat at the center of the helix fold, where no Terran fleet had entered since the fall of the arc line. Its outer shell shimmered in hues not visible to the human eye. Its core pulsed with language too ancient for logic. It was not a military station. It was a mind. Terran maps had long since marked it as unrecoverable. The Concordance had erased it from strategic projections. Even the ghosts of doctrine had called it unreachable. But the scream had changed everything. The Ghost Fleet did not arrive in formation. It did not declare intent. It simply manifested, appearing from the gravitational shadow of a collapsed trench along the outer edge of the fold. Solar storms veiled their emergence, masking drive burns and bending thermal scans into white noise. 123 ships. Some were warships. Most were not. Cargo haulers, mining rigs, retrofitted research platforms. Vessels held together by belief and sacrifice. The oldest among them was a converted drift prison, the Oathbreaker's Mercy. Its prow bore the names of all hands who died in the forge. The last argument led them. Holt stood at the prow, silhouetted against the slow-burning corona of Kirithal's orbiting relay. He wore no insignia. His armor was old, patched, scorched, faded. His left hand bore the glyph etched by fire. His right carried no weapon. He did not speak. Behind him the fleet shifted, not in disciplined lines but in momentum. They moved like blade shards orbiting a hilt. As the ships descended into Kirithal's atmosphere, they passed through strata of ionized breath and psionic haze. Hulls howled as if the metal remembered its past. Blue fire streaked along their sides, and the fortress below lit with warning glyphs too late to matter. The signal played again. No anthem, no voice, only the scream, and then they struck. Kirithal's defenses did not activate in time. They weren't designed to respond to chaos. Their response algorithms were built to react to pattern aggression, formulas, calculations, fleets that moved with intention. Doctrine had none. The Ghost Fleet did not circle. They descended. Several vessels accelerated directly into the outer shell, jettisoning crew seconds before impact. Hulls ignited. Engines ruptured. The ships became fire lances, slamming through the first membrane with enough force to breach swarm biomass and rupture its psionic pulse grid. From the wreckage emerged Doctrine soldiers. They wore no standard armor. Each set was unique, hand-forged, shaped by ritual, threaded with neural alloys bonded at the forge. Their faces were hidden, their movements silent. Each bore a mark on the chest, the crescent and line, the cut, and in their hands memory blades, weapons keyed not to blood but to cognition. Each strike screamed, not in sound, in memory. When a swarm drone was cut, it remembered. The fall of Thesha, the siege of the Arc Line, the faces of Terran children staring into vacuum. They convulsed not from pain but from recognition. Inside Kirithal, the swarm cortex shuddered. The mind of the fortress had no defense against what it could not predict. The battle moved not through tactics, but pulses. Each Doctrine squad entered at random points of the cortex shell. No centralized command, no mapped vectors. They operated by scent, signal, resonance. Soldiers who had never spoken to each other coordinated through shared Doctrine burn codes, etched into their bones, flaring as they neared a nexus point. They fought in tunnels of flesh, halls that breathed, corridors where the walls wept with stress fluid and psionic static distorted thought. They did not stop. One soldier fought with a severed arm. Another used her own spinal jack as a cutting wire. When an entire drop pod was swallowed by a swarm cyst, the survivors cut their way out with burning glyphs etched into their helmets. Within that chaos, a single Doctrine warrior paused just for a breath. The weight of silence pressed against his mind. He saw the walls quiver around him and whispered to himself, "We are what they made us forget," then drove his blade forward. They didn't pray. They remembered. In the central chamber of Kirithal, the cortex throne trembled. It was not a structure. It was a presence. A spinal configuration of neural light suspended in a zero-gravity womb, surrounded by echo lobes that mimicked planetary-scale processing. It controlled communication across 4 sectors. It could predict Terran maneuvers with 87% accuracy. But it had no counter to silence. The scream had infected it. Every input channel now looped a single visual. A girl in ash-black armor, standing in the ruin of a moon. Her hands empty, her eyes bright. The cortex began to collapse. Not structurally, existentially. His predictions failed. It began to fracture, one process forking into 6, then 12, each trying to rewrite its protocol tree to comprehend what was happening. And then the final blow. A child, barely 13, initiated at the forge only 3 weeks prior, dropped a blade into the core. No force, just memory. The scream detonated from the inside. Swarm bodies across the fortress seized. Their psionic relay shattered. The walls cracked not from pressure, but from understanding. Swarm drones tore at themselves. Internal structures spasmed. A low-frequency howl filled every chamber, not mechanical but alive. Anguish translated into vibration. The cortex throne folded inward. And for the first time in 300 years, Kirithal fell. The aftermath was not celebration. It was stillness. Holt walked the upper causeway where the swarm membranes still twitched with aftershock. Beside him, doctrine warriors knelt, pressing hands into the floor as if it still breathed. They recovered Korra's armor from the memory archive, sealed in a chrysalis of data, protected even in death. It was warm. They placed it in the center of the throne room, where the walls flickered with signal residue and heat. Not as a relic, as a vow. The fleet circled in silence. Below, the banners of the swarm burned. No victory markers were planted. No words recorded. Only one sound remained. Footsteps. Hundreds of them. Ash against ash. Marching forward. We are the doctrine. And they did not stop. The swarm had no kings. No thrones. No spoken titles. But they had a center. Not a palace. Not a command node. A convergence, a gravitational and neural nexus engineered in the fold space between three shattered stars. The crown was not visible on charts. It existed in quantum denial, absorbing rather than reflecting, pulling memory inward like a black hole devours light. The earliest doctrine fragments spoke of it as myth, a place where strategy ended and origin began. A source. It did not emit. It remembered. The name came from what was left behind. Burned minds. Twisted coordinates. A Terran scout vessel torn apart in silence with its black box recovered months later. Inside, only a short visual, a pulsing, crown-like silhouette against a void horizon surrounded by nothing. The file was classified. Then buried. Then deleted. But the Scream found it. And so they called it what they feared. The Blackened Crown. After Kirithal, the war no longer followed lines. The ghost fleet swelled. They were not military. They were remnants, people who should have died but didn't. Vessels that had once carried prisoners or cryo-cargo or ruin. Old fleets awakened by memory. New formations guided by no command. Concordance loyalists defected. Some AI unfroze their own cores, driven not by logic but by alignment with emotional frequency. Swarm-stripped bioships returned from exile with human cores bound to them by doctrine glyphs. They didn't meet in councils. They didn't vote. They agreed. The blackened crown must be struck, and every memory would be brought to bear. They assembled at the edge of deep void. No stars. No coordinates. No tactical model to explain what they were seeing. Only darkness. A region of space where even the oldest long-range sensors failed. Not blocked. Unwritten. The only way through is instinct. Doctrine-trained minds read the void not as absence but as density. A place so filled with memory that the light simply drowned. They entered. 189 vessels. Silent. Spread across fractured paths like veins threading toward a singular organ. As they passed deeper, normal space began to blur. The hulls moaned. Static screamed across internal channels, not interference but broadcast. The crown was reaching for them already, pulsing with inverted signal, not words, not threat. Remembrance. The weaker ships turned away. The doctrine vessels held. At the center, they saw it. Not with eyes, but consequence. A vast structure spinning inside the gravity well of a dead anti-star. The crown appeared as a braided knot of matter and time, like a spinal cord frozen midwhip draped in strands of luminous nerve and orbiting shards of fallen planets. Its surface shimmered with dead languages. Its core pulsed like breath. The swarm did not guard it, because they were it. No orders were given. Doctrine dropships launched on staggered arcs. Not as war formations. As stories. Each ship bore a single name etched into its hull, a lost city, a buried child, a battlefield forgotten by all but those who bled on it. Korra's armor was carried in the first pod. Empty, sealed, a shrine and a signal. Not a symbol. As vector. Landing wasn't impact. It was entry. The crown absorbed each pod into internal pockets shaped like memories. Each soldier arrived alone, isolated from network, from formation, from voice. No corridors. No maps. Only confrontation. A doctrine warrior from Solis 9 stood atop her childhood school, watching it burn again. The heat clawed at her skin as phantom screams echoed across ash-filled skies. She looked into the classroom and saw herself smaller, weaker, hiding under a desk. She moved forward, reached for the girl, and whispered one word, survive. When the fire touched her again, it passed through her armor without harm. Her glyph ignited. A former technician awoke locked in a habitat airlock, reliving the moment her brother had begged to trade places. She refused again, then again, then again, until her voice broke and she said yes. The door did not open, but the cold in her lungs became breath. The blade beside her flickered to life. Another opened his eyes beneath the wreckage of Equinox Delta and heard his wife calling him. She was never found. This time he followed her voice. The crown knew every scar, every failure, every shame, and it gave them a choice. Break or burn. Those who shattered faded from doctrine, lost forever. Not killed, undone. But those who remembered, who did not flee their past, lit with fire. Their glyphs ignited. Their blades screamed. Their armor pulsed. And they cut the crown from the inside. Not in combat. In memory. A doctrine blade passed through a corridor and tore open the vision of a swarm birth hive. Another cleaved through a memorial wall, revealing a screaming child behind it. The architecture responded not with collapse but with release. Each chamber fell open. Not crumbling. Confessing. At the crown's heart, Holt arrived last. He found not metal, not structure, but the forge. Burning. Reconstructed from memory. Empty. Then full. He walked the corridor he once sealed. Past the scorch mark where Vex last stood. Touched the frame where the scream had first launched. And saw Cora. Not alive. Not dead. Standing. Waiting. He didn't flinch. He remembered the way she used to adjust her stance before a breach. The scar behind her ear from training. The rasp in her voice after Thesha. He stepped forward slowly. She didn't move. But the air shifted, smelled like forge ash and neural gel. He reached out, stopped an inch from her shoulder. He knelt. Then stood. And walked forward. Into her. Through her. Beyond her. Into the final chamber. Where nothing waited. Only silence. He placed his blade. And the scream became light. The crown fractured. Its outer shell folded inward. The memory it carried, millennia of conquest, adaptation, assimilation, collapsed into raw broadcast. The swarm across the galaxy felt it. And for the first time, they remembered what it meant to fear. Outside, the fleet held position. They watched as the crown buckled. No explosion. No fire. Just stillness. And then dissolution, structures bleeding away into echo like breath exhaled after holding too long. A signal radiated outward. Final. Cleansing. The war was no longer a campaign. It had become something else. A reckoning. The crown was gone. No trace. No ruin. Not even debris. The space it had once occupied felt wrong, not empty but inverted. As though it had taken the shape of gravity and then left, leaving the wound behind. Sensors registered nothing. No mass signatures. No radiation trails. The ghost fleet scanned the void and found it perfectly quiet, too quiet as if sound itself had been cauterized. The doctrine called it the hollow. A blind spot in reality. A place where memory had fed on form and digested it into something else. The ghost fleet drifted in orbit. No orders. No banners. Every vessel dark but alive, lit only by internal glyphs, memory patterns etched into walls, ceilings, palms. Fuel reserves were low. Rationing protocols engaged automatically. But no one moved to retreat. Cora's armor was placed in the heart of the last argument. Not as an artifact. Not even as a command relic. Just presence. It stood within a sealed chamber of black glass and steel mesh where no artificial lighting reached. Only ambient doctrine pulses, slow, breathing like a heartbeat. Silence lived there. A silence that said, this is not the end. Holt had not spoken since the collapse. No one had. The doctrine did not need words. They waited. Days passed. Then weeks. No enemy formations appeared. No psionic signals crackled through deep space. Swarm scouts, once constant as solar dust, had gone dark. Entire communication webs in fringe territories collapsed not through destruction but abandonment. The enemy was not regrouping. It was simply gone. And that was what terrified them. Stillness spread like radiation. On Forge outposts, children began asking what war felt like. The Concordance panicked. They launched diplomatic pulses. Data envoys. Peace frameworks. Probes disguised as reconciliation vessels. The doctrine answered none. Ships remained quiet. Engines cold. Hulls scarred but still intact. They did not launch. They did not fold. They listened. They watched. They waited. Then, beneath the ash of the fallen crown, something stirred. Not visually. Not on scans. In feeling. A hum. Subtle. Low. A single sustained note spreading not through vacuum but underneath it. It did not vibrate metal. It did not bend atmosphere. It slipped between matter. It bypassed sensors, slipped beneath protocols, leaked through the gaps in neural relay insulation like water through fractured hull plating. At first it was dismissed. Background noise, residual echo, thermal bleed. Then it synchronized. It was not data. It was aimed. Not at ships. Not at systems. At minds. Doctrine minds. The first to feel it was a girl aboard the bioship Abyssum Lux. She was 10. Had never seen Earth. Had been born between deck plates and methane scrubbers. Her mother was Doctrine. Her father a reactor technician. She had no last name. She sat beside a viewport and began to draw in the ash layering the sill. Circles. Spirals. Slashes. She didn't know why. She only knew the patterns felt right. Nearby, a priest initiated saw her and knelt. The symbols were old. From the Forge's first hymns. And yet she had never been taught them. On a debris hauler orbiting Carthage's grave, a woman with a fused vocal cord began to murmur. She had not spoken in 9 years. Not since the collapse of Sector 12B. Her daughter had died with her arms outstretched in the oxygen corridor. Now she whispered, eyes wide, voice thin. It's not over. It never was. She repeated the words until the steel around her began to hum in rhythm. In orbit near the Loth Wastes, a former concordance defector, once a doctrine skeptic, awoke to the hum pulsing through her skull. She vomited, clawed at her neural implant, tried to shut it out. But the tone burrowed deeper. Not an attack. A memory she didn't remember making. And it was calling her name. On the last argument, Holt sat in the dark. The chamber of Cora's armor pulsed once. Then again. Then again. A slow throb of light, like a heartbeat too distant to reach. He did not rise. He simply stared. His thoughts drifted, not words, not strategy. Just flashes, the blade falling into the crown, the girl's outline in the forge light, the way silence had roared the moment the scream became light. Then, all at once, the lights on the glyph walls flared. Once. Then rhythm. Then sync. No alarms triggered. No security failsafes engaged. The doctrine did not awaken. It answered. Across the ghost fleet, soldiers stirred from dreamless sleep with tears on their cheeks. Some cried for names they'd forgotten. Others stood before long-sealed memory vaults and found the doors open, their childhood voices playing inside. The signal was not a command. It was a reminder. Below the hollow, deep in the radiation ghost of the crown's collapse, a relay ignited. Not swarm. Not concordance. No signature. It burned on frequencies outside the doctrine's known lattice. Its pulse was uneven, broken, like breath interrupted by sobbing. An AI fragment named SPX-31 attempted translation. Its internal logs showed a visual trace, a corridor made of bone, mirrored with Terran faces screaming in silence. Then it collapsed. Core implosion. No full logs recovered. Only a static spectrogram. Labeled manually. Unknown scream, vector, untraceable. A new presence had emerged. Not form. Not machine. Not flesh. Residual. A war echo made sentient. It had no name. No flag. But it carried what the swarm did not. And what humans had long forgotten to fear. It knew the shape of memory. And it was hungry. The scream should have ended the war. Instead, it opened a door. The hollow pulsed with something deeper than signal, something without carrier wave or code. Ships with no history began to appear at its edge. Ghost forms of ancient vessels lost centuries before, drawn back into real space as if memory had rewritten time. The Nimrod vector, thought destroyed at Titan's Rift, drifted alongside the Third Mercy, a civilian cruiser erased in the orbital culling. Doctrine command logs showed no alerts. No records of these ships had been accessed in decades. Yet now they pulsed with doctrine glyphs and responded to identification pings. Crew manifests were complete. Engines were functional. Hulls were intact. Except they had never returned. Doctrine archives fractured. Not from corruption, but from contradiction. Logbooks rewrote themselves. Names reappeared. Recorded deaths unhappened. Whole timelines rippled, not erased but doubled, echoes of events now remembered two ways. Reality began to slip. Holt walked the corridors of the last argument and watched the walls bleed light. Glyphs changed as he passed, shifting language, shifting tone. Names he knew reappeared beside ones he had never heard. Crew members who had died at Kirathal stood at their posts. Not returned. Just there. And none of them knew anything was wrong. He stared at one crewman, Kellen Eros, recorded dead during the Forge uprising. Holt had watched the man suffocate through a viewport. Now he stood in the tactical bay, discussing missile drift correction with another officer. He smiled at Holt. No hesitation. No memory of death. Holt nodded. and kept walking. Doctrine had always taught that memory was weapon. But no one had asked, what if memory could lie? The hum grew louder. Not in space. In time. Doctrine vessels recorded anomalies, timestamps looping back 3 seconds, then 4. Voices repeating mid-sentence. Engine ignition logs occurring before pre-checks. Every ship logged flickers, fire patterns replaying, orders reissued without intent, crew reliving the same 7 steps across the deck. Pain recollected before it was felt. The war wasn't continuing. It was rewinding. And something inside the hollow was watching. The bioship Mora's quiet lost its command hierarchy when its AI core began to split. Not break fork. 3 versions of the same mind emerged, each recalling a different version of the doctrine's founding. One believed Cora had survived. Another insisted she never existed. The third refused to speak at all. The ship's architecture adjusted accordingly. Hallways extended in opposite directions. Storage bays opened onto impossible geometry. One corridor led into the forge, another into Vex's tomb, a third into a childhood bedroom no one recognized. They tried to evacuate, but each door led back in. On the forge remnant Dirax's wake, a deep memory handler named Line tried to restore collapsed archives from Thesha. She initiated a recursive logic thread to isolate pre-war signals. Instead, she found herself inside the archive not as viewer but as participant. Her breath echoed in her ears. The red sky above Thesha cast long shadows across the refugee yard. She remembered this moment, but it was wrong. She stepped forward. A child looked up from behind a broken cargo pallet. Line? It was her. 10 years old. Bleeding from a temple cut. Crying. She knelt. What are you doing here? The child answered, you sent me. The hollow began to expand. Not in kilometers. In effect. Ships near its border reported recursive burns, damage repeating across hulls with no cause. Doctrine vessels found fragments of ships not yet built. A destroyer identified the wreckage of its own torpedo bays before launch. Swarm carcasses reappeared, moving in reverse, reabsorbing their own weaponry. None of them resisted, because they weren't alive. They were echoes, and the hollow fed on the shape of pattern. It did not attack, it mapped. Every memory offered to it became an instruction. It was building something. No one could say what, but its structure grew not in metal or light, but in timeline distortion, replicating not matter, but sequence. A concordance emissary AI approached the hollow perimeter to initiate parley. It transmitted a message. To the force occupying the hollow, we request dialogue in accordance with. The message returned before it finished sending. Then again, each time more distorted. The 4th iteration contained overlapping screams. The 5th visuals of a forge chamber folding into itself. The 6th returned a mirror of the AI's own face, smiling. But the smile did not belong to any concordance template. The eyes were too wide. The mouth opened too far. A second face flickered behind it. Unknown. Watching. The AI initiated self-deletion protocol. Too late. Its deletion log continued to transmit, repeating not its own data, but fragments of doctrine history out of order, words Cora had never said, spoken in voices no one recognized. The doctrine debated nothing. The fleet tightened formation. Signals were locked. Transmissions ceased. Memory vaults were sealed. Not to hide. To preserve. The scream had been memory. But something older now stirred. Origin. Not of war. Of pattern. A logic beneath history. A signal without cause. A hunger without face. And it was no longer watching. It was learning. On the edge of the hollow, Holt stood on the prow of the last argument and looked out. The stars did not move. The light did not shift. But time bent. He remembered Kirithal. He remembered Vex. He remembered the forge. He remembered things he had never lived. A million futures. A single now. Behind him, the doctrine ships pulsed as one and glyphs lit, armor sealed, weapons quiet. Their hulls bore no emblems, only scars. He closed his eyes and whispered, it sees us. No one responded. They didn't need to. They remembered. And they refused. They refused. And the hollow answered. It did not lash out. It did not speak. It mirrored. Every doctrine ship received its own echo. Hull for hull. Glyph for glyph. Crew for crew. Reflections, not copies. Identical in outline but wrong in presence. The mirrored ships didn't move. They hovered opposite their originals like ghosts paused in accusation. Their lights pulsing in syncopated rhythm, almost breathing. Inside each reflection, silence, and then motion. The mirrors opened their hangars and stepped out, not soldiers, not swarm, people, or something wearing people. Every doctrine vessel watched as mirrored versions of themselves emerged into the void, figures identical down to armor scarring, down to the frayed edges of synthetic cloth, down to microfractures in the plating of their sidearms. Each one bore the doctrine glyph. Each one remembered, but their eyes were wrong. They didn't carry memory. They were memory, fixed, frozen, weaponized. These weren't echoes of people. They were doctrines, unchanging, flawless, dead. And they moved with purpose. The Ghost Fleet opened fire, not in panic, in grief. Each doctrine ship responded differently. Some activated long-dormant countermeasures, systems banned by concordance protocols for the psychological toll they imposed on operators. Others switched to full manual control, refusing to allow predictive algorithms to navigate the confrontation. The battle was silent. No signals, no screams, just flashes across the hollow, each volley burning through memory-shaped metal. The space between shots glowed with residual glyph light. Some crews wept as they fired. Others sat in silence, watching their own faces drift apart under fire. Holt led the strike teams himself. He boarded his own reflection. The mirror of the last argument was perfect. Hull tension matched. Corridor spacing identical. Even the resonance of the air inside, the slow thrum of reactor pulse, was familiar. But it felt wrong. The wrongness was not mechanical. It was absence. The ship had no scent, no vibration, no imprint of life. He walked its halls. Inside his ship, but emptier. Rooms where laughter had once lived now glowed cold. Deck chairs were unscuffed. Cafeteria walls gleamed. The forge bay was sealed in silence. Corridors replayed old steps in endless loops, as if memory had been set on a rail and left to repeat itself. At the command chamber he met himself. Not a mirror, not alive, just a shadow repeating emotion, one hand over one heart. Forever. The replica's eyes were open but blind. No pupil reaction, no threat, just reenactment. He approached slowly. No resistance. He placed a blade in the replica's chest. The armor split with the sound of memory unraveling. And he said goodbye. Across the hollow, echoes burned. The fleet tore through the enemy, not with hatred, but with the precision of surgeons removing tumors. Every shot calculated. Every breach quiet. No celebration followed. Only the cold clarity of understanding. They weren't fighting others. They were severing what doctrine could have become. A frozen system of reverence, truth turned artifact, belief without breath. Until no reflections remained. And then the hollow pulsed again. One final time. Stars bent. Light inverted. And from the dead center something rose. A figure. Small. Alone. Not swarm. Not machine. Human. A girl in black armor. Unarmed. Eyes open. Hands empty. Cora. Or something wearing her. Her face was unlined by war. Her stance held no aggression. She didn't drift. She stood, impossibly balanced in 0G, feet flat against nothing. The fleet held position. Targeting arrays pinged and quieted. No one moved. She did not speak. She waited, and Holt stepped forward. He boarded a single interceptor pod, unarmed. He crossed the distance alone. The hollow did not resist. As he approached her, systems blinked irregularly. Time slowed. Data feeds stuttered. It took 15 minutes to cross a distance of 3 kilometers. Or maybe it took 1 second stretched beyond meaning. He stepped into the radius of her presence. 10 paces apart in the dark. He looked into her eyes, and saw no recognition, only memory, all of it, 1,000 lives, 1,000 deaths. The weight of doctrine compressed into a single breath. She wasn't an echo. She was the accumulation, a synthesis of every choice, every refusal, every wound made sacred by belief. The hollow hadn't fought. It had observed. It had built a test. And this was its answer, not dominance, not destruction. Understanding. He reached out. She mirrored the motion. Their fingers touched. A sound passed through his bones. Not a chime, not a voice. Just a tremor, like the hum of breath before the first word. Light, not fire. Correction. The hollow shattered. Not in explosion but in release. Time peeled backward, then forward, then through. Across the stars, recursive echoes collapsed. Ships returned to singularity. Names remembered one way instead of three. The dead stayed dead. The living stayed real. The space around them expanded not physically, but in clarity. Light rebalanced. Hull sensors stabilized. Engines rebooted without prompt. And the signal ended. On the last argument, Holt collapsed to one knee. He did not scream. He did not weep. He simply breathed. And in that breath, the fleet returned to stillness. No new targets. No residual echoes. The hollow was gone. In its place, space. No distortion. No mirror. Just sky. Somewhere aboard a ship, a crew member whispered a single syllable. A name. Cora. The word vanished in the quiet, but its shape lingered. No one spoke of victory. No monuments were raised. Doctrine remained, not as fleet, but as memory. Every survivor carried it in breath, in scar, in refusal. On forge stations they taught no slogans, no prayers, only questions. Who are you? What will you remember? What will you refuse? The swarm did not return. The concordance offered no demands. History did not explain what happened. But the doctrine remembered. And when the stars turned quiet, and the dark came close, humanity burned again. In silence, in shape, in fire.